Welcome to Saga Thing, where we're putting the Sagas the Icelanders on trial. I'm John.
And I'm Andy. In each episode, we review a saga, provide a close reading of the text, and then offer our judgments and final ratings at the Saga Thing.
Yes. Now, we finished Grettir's Saga's summary in 4 episodes, which is really only one more than we'd planned on.
Which is not too bad, actually, if you think about it.
No, not really. But now, at long last, we get a chance to evaluate the saga through our usual categories. And we're assuming that most of you know how our judgment section works by now, but in case you don't, we're looking at Best Bloodshed, Body Count, Nicknames, Notable Witticisms, Outlawry, in which we'll exile one figure from Iceland and the sagas forever, Thingman, in which both Andy and I will choose supporters from the saga cast to join our all-star teams, and a final rating section. And most of those are self-explanatory, I think.
Right. Now, so you know how we always say something like, there's so much to cover here, and there are a lot of good candidates in this one every time we do this?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Grettir's Saga is like the longest text that we've covered, and it's got more bloodshed, more bodies to count, more nicknames, and more witticisms than we could possibly do justice to in just this one episode.
Yeah, it really does.
So let's do two or three judgment episodes.
Never.
What do you think? No, we'll just do this one. Now, but if we do look at like something like Bloodshed, for example, I've got nearly 20 good candidates for that honor. And I had to cut a lot of wonderful deaths and maimings just to get down to 20.
Yeah, no, I understand. I didn't have quite as many as you, but I had a pretty long list too. And my notable witticisms category is a smorgasbord of amusing lines. And don't even get me started on the nicknames.
No, I won't. Trust me. I won't.
Don't worry. I'll save them for later.
Well, given that I've written down like 85 names while reading, before I got tired and quit, I'm sure you've got plenty to discuss. You must be having nearly 100.
I do.
Okay, so if you do have a lot, I'm going to ask you to restrain yourself this time.
Never.
You and I managed to significantly pare down the list in all the other categories, but I did trust you. I left you alone for nicknames. And I don't want to have another Vatnsdal Saga situation on our hands, if you know what I mean.
Oh, you just relax. Don't you worry about it. Everything's going to be just fine.
Sure.
I prepared a nice little list for us to enjoy, featuring some interesting stories and some of the best.
Oh, good. Now, I hope you have Thorbjorn Laxakar on that list.
Ah, good old Thorbjorn Salmon Man.
Salmon Man!
See, you'll have to wait until we get there.
Okay, well, let's not waste any time. Our first category is...
Best Bloodshed.
All right, now, we've had sagas with some pretty impressive examples of bloodshed in them so far.
Yes, we have. Ingolf and the Outlaws from Vatnsdal Saga comes to mind.
Ah, yes, one of my favorites. Now, we've also had a Uniped archers and Scottish giants, Hrafnkel being strung up by his Achilles tendons, and even Gisli slicing a man in two. Down the middle, I might add.
That's a hard way to do it.
Yeah, that's not the easy way. But we've never had a saga so jam-packed with the kind of ridiculous action movie violence as this one seems to be.
Yeah, there's a lot of killing in this saga, which explains why you had around 20 good candidates for the award, and I had a similar number. But we discussed all this beforehand in an effort to narrow the field a bit, and somehow we've each managed to choose just 3 potential candidates for the category.
Now, you listeners won't understand just how difficult that conversation between us was.
Oh, I think they might understand, because I'm sure they're going to be very annoyed when we fail to list their favorite examples.
Yeah, it's possible.
But each time we tried to wrap it up and get us to narrow things down, one of us would keep interrupting with one more favorite.
That's right. No, I had a lot of favorites, and I know you did too. But I think I'm pleased with our 6 candidates that we've settled on.
Okay, so who's going first?
Well, I always like it when we keep it in chronological order. It lends some semblance of structure to it. So the first one that I've got comes before yours, I think.
Okay.
All right. Now I wanted to include the scene at the Battle of Havsfjord where Onund leans back to dodge a blow and ends up losing his leg.
Hey, wait now.
Yeah? What?
You're sneaking in one of the scenes we eliminated from contention. I wanted to get Onund's leg being cut off in, and we decided we couldn't do that.
No, I'm not. I was just setting up my first candidate.
Oh, sure you were. Why don't you just skip ahead to the actual candidate then?
All right. Well, it's been a while since we talked about Onund, so I just thought a quick refresher was in order. But if you insist, I'll jump ahead.
Yeah, thanks.
But I am going to take a little more time with this first candidate just because we didn't get to cover this episode as fully as we should have in the Onund episode.
All right, that's fair. You can do it, but only because I think other people will enjoy this scene as much as we did.
Exactly. So, the scene I want to talk about occurs in Chapter 4, way back at the start of the saga, something we covered, it seems, months ago. Onund had already lost his leg, fallen into a depression, and gotten married to Grettir's daughter Asa. He then begins to feel a little bit better about himself after a battle against two Vikings, Vigbjoth and Vestmar, who have been raiding Scotland and the Hebrides. In an attempt to catch the Vikings, Onund traps them in a narrow and deep channel between two cliffs, somewhere near the Isle of Bute. Maybe one of our Scottish listeners can identify a possible site for this battle by the description of the setting that they give.
Yeah, good luck with that. The setting description is a rocky fjord. So if you can find one of those in Scotland, just let us know.
No. Well, it says that no more than 5 ships at a time could get into the channel. It was possible to get ashore on one side, and there was an island nearby.
There you go.
Presumably outside of the channel, right? So Onund sent several of his men ashore and then stationed them atop the cliff, hidden from view. Looking helpless, he then lured the Vikings to follow him into the channel. Now, thinking that they had Onund right where they wanted him, the Vikings attacked his ship, and Onund welcomed that attack and let his ship drift toward the cliff. I wonder what he's up to. Now, thinking that he was trying to escape, the Vikings pursued, attempting to place their own ships somewhere between him and the cliff.
Right, and they're even taunting Onund while this is going on, yelling things like, "It's not often that we've seen men who can't stand up going into battle."
Right, but Onund will get the last laugh in the end. As soon as the Viking ships were beneath the cliff, Onund gave the signal, and his men began to drop such huge stones on them that nothing could withstand their force. And a great number of the Vikings fell there, and some were so badly wounded that they couldn't fight anymore.
Right, and we should make the point here that the kinds of ships that we're talking about, these are ships built for speed and maneuverability, not for strength. Right. So these are not the kinds of ships that a rock would just bounce off of. These are the kinds of ships that a large rock from a great height goes right through.
That's right. And when the Vikings tried to escape, those that had working ships after this, they found that they had trapped themselves in the narrowest part of the channel, and Onund's men are closing in. And between the number of ships and the quick current, there was nowhere for them to go. Now, this allows Onund and his men to begin boarding the ships for a bit of Viking cleanup. And that's where my first candidate for Best Bloodshed actually begins.
Well, that was a lot of setup, but it's well worth it. And shame on us for not covering that scene in more detail the first time around, by the way. It's a real indicator of Onund's genius, and I think it's a lot of fun. Now, let's get to the bloodshed.
All right, so Vigbjoth the Viking attempts to encourage his men to fight back, but they're being overwhelmed by Onund's small force, and Onund himself is there. And despite his obvious disability, Onund tells his men to back off so that he and Vigbjoth can see how they got on together. Well, they put a log under Onund's knee and then back off. Vigbjoth fights his way along the ship to the stern where he finally meets Onund. Vigbjoth then strikes with his sword. It hits Onund's shield, shearing off the edge and deflecting the sword downward and into the log that Onund has under his knee. And with this sword stuck in Onund's leg, Vigbjoth is left defenseless. And at that moment, Onund strikes at Vigbjoth's shoulder, taking his arm clean off. Vestmar, the Viking, sees this and flees, leaving poor Vigbjoth to bleed to death in front of Onund.
Right, and it's not a quick death.
No, he's got to lie there and bleed to death. And Onund has enough time at that moment to compose a poem about his victory and gloat over the increasingly pale Vigbjoth. But we'll have to save that poem for the notable witticisms because it's such a good one.
Excellent. Now, that's not our bloodiest candidate for Best Bloodshed, but it's a good one.
It's an excellent one, and I definitely think so. Now, the scene isn't just significant for me because we get to see Onund's intelligence at work. This battle also allows Onund to rediscover himself and to show his value in battle once again. For me, it's a real powerful scene. Now I'm done, so thanks for your patience. What's your first candidate, John?
All right. I don't think I need to spend quite as much time on this one because everyone who listened to the first episode of Grettir's Saga will remember the epic battle on top of the whale carcass.
Oh, wow. We should, why don't we just stop now? I don't know what could beat that. It's incredible.
Well, there are other candidates worth considering, but this one has got to be in our wheelhouse. I mean, it's thoroughly violent. It's completely bizarre. It's just odd enough to garner extra attention.
Just odd enough. I'd say it's downright fantastic. I mean, this is the kind of thing we live for in Saga Thing.
So let me just remind everyone of the best parts of this scene. So Onund's sons have been arguing with Flosi Eriksson about who has the rightful claim to the land they're living on. All this comes to a head when a whale carcass washes ashore on the disputed property. Flosi and his men find the whale first, and they get busy carving it up.
Yeah, and if I recall, this is during a famine, right? So this whale meat alone, not to mention all the other stuff, is going to be extremely valuable.
That's right, but the Onundersons show up and all hell breaks loose. They slice at each other with flensing knives, crash about on the blood-soaked shore, swinging axes, flinging giant sheets of whale blubber at each other. It's complete chaos.
I mean, you could stop right there at fleeing whale blubber and I'd vote for this one. It's amazing.
I know, but it gets better.
Well, it's hard to get better than using whale blubber as a weapon, but you go ahead and try to make it better.
All right, remember Thorgir Bottleback? The guy who got his nickname after Flosie's clumsy assassin axed a bottle of whey on his back?
Of course I do. I don't forget that easily.
Well, he spots the clumsy assassin, Thorfinn, who's up at the head of the whale, jumps onto the whale's back, runs the full length of the whale in a kind of epic slow motion through the battle, which is raging on all around him, men being beaten to death with whale ribs along one side.
Yeah.
Runs up to the head of the whale and chops off Thorfinn's head.
Oof. And don't forget his amazing line. That's what seals the deal.
Right, but I think we're going to save the actual line for notable witticisms.
Oh, again, here we go. All right. Well, it's a great line and it's a great scene. I mean, I almost feel bad mentioning any other candidates now. That's incredible.
Oh, now, nobody needs to be ashamed of their bloodshed in this saga. They've all got plenty to be proud of. I mean, how can we do best bloodshed without mentioning all the animals that Grettir kills, for example?
Oh, good point. Oh, those poor animals in this saga. It's hard to pick just one animal scene. There's a lot of them.
It really is. In Grettir's childhood alone, we've got some pretty impressive bloodshed. Mm-hmm. But I know that you're probably thinking of the flaying of Kengala the horse's back right
Yeah, how could I not? That's the most graphic of all the deaths of animals in the saga.
I know. But don't forget those poor goslings that Osmund asked Grettir to watch.
Oh, those poor little... That's sad.
Yeah, it does seem at times like every animal that comes into contact with Grettir meets an untimely and violent end. He's got the geese, Kengala the horse, and that giant bear just in the beginning of the saga.
Yeah, now that's one that I really wanted to include. I mean, in terms of what we look for in Best Bloodshed, the fight with the bear has it all. I mean, it includes an impressive fall mid-battle down the side of a cliff where he lands on the bear, killing it. Or almost killing it, I guess. It's one of my favorite scenes in the saga. Pretty amazing stuff.
And you didn't want to go on after the whale scene.
Yeah, I'm glad we did.
I told you there are other great candidates. We're not even done with animals. Remember that Grettir knowingly leaves his horse vulnerable for Glom to kill. And the results are spectacular. His horse is dragged out into the open and crushed.
Well, Grettir had to see what Glom would do. I mean, that horse is kind of like Grettir's Honshao. A good opportunity for our hero to see what he was up against.
It's a nice Beowulf reference.
Yeah. Oh, and don't forget the sheep. Grettir's not nice to sheep at all.
No, but that's hard to criticize him for. I mean, the guy has to eat.
Oh, sure he does. He could have gone vegan, though. Speaking
of vegan in medieval Iceland, that would be interesting.
Right. Well, if you're an outlaw, it's a good choice. I think you're forced into it. Anyway, speaking of Glom and the animals, we have to include the cows.
Which cows?
The cows. Don't you remember this scene?
No, you always manage to find cows somewhere in these sagas.
Obscure animal deaths. Yeah, anyway, this is from chapter 33, just when Glom is really starting to terrorize Thorhall's farm. The saga says that one fine winter morning, the farmer's wife went out to the cowshed to milk the cows. Inside, she hears a terrible crack and a horrible bellowing. So she called the farmer to investigate, and inside, he found all the cows going crazy. They were goring each other, crying out, stampeding around the shed. I mean, it's like a scene from the farmlands of hell itself.
Are there farmlands in hell?
Well, I don't know, but I know if there were, I assume that this is exactly how the cows would behave, and milking them would be nearly impossible.
Well, I mean, you'd have to try to grab an udder as it goes by, I suppose.
Well, maybe, but then how do you catch the milk that way?
You'd have to hold your pail up and aim carefully. I mean, practice makes perfect. If you're in hell, you've got an eternity to work on this kind of thing.
Yeah, good point. I guess you do. Anyway, I love the author's description of the farmer's response to all this. He comes in and sees, the cows goring each other, going crazy.
Mm-hmm. So what does he say?
He says, the farmer didn't care for that very much. That's a very reasoned and calm response to such a chaotic scene.
You got to admire that kind of understatement.
Yeah. And if that wasn't bad enough, he then finds his favorite herdsman in the barn, nearly broken in half. It's a brilliant and disturbing moment. Quite good for the saga.
It really is. All right. My last one is probably Grettir's attack on the giant.
That one is certainly bloody enough.
Oh, it is. If you're looking for real kind of visceral gore in your best bloodshed, this one is hard to beat. As we said in the episode where we covered this scene, it's a close parallel to Beowulf's fight with Grendel and Grendel's mother, only kind of in reverse. So in this case, he encounters the giant, who's a pretty obvious stand-in for Grendel, in the cave underneath the waterfall. When the giant sees Grettir, he leaps up and strikes at him with a huge heptasax, or a poleaxe. Grettir parries and cuts the shaft of the heptasax in two with his short sword. And as the giant reaches for another sword, Grettir attacks him from the front, slicing at the giant's chest and belly. And the description here is just awful. It says, "It practically took off all the ribs and belly, so that his innards were flung out of him onto the river."
Flung out of him?
That's what it says. It just speaks to how violent the hit really was. The blood and guts then flow out and are swept down the river. They kind of just spill out of him over the rocks and into the water. And remember that priest is supposed to be waiting for Grettir. Well, he panics and leaves after he sees all this viscera floating by.
Viscera. No, he's not exactly the brave and trusty companion that Grettir had hoped for.
No, he seems to have trouble finding trusty companions.
Yeah. All right, well, my last nominee is a quick one, very quick. And I don't think I need to go through any lengthy review here because we just covered this one in our final episode of the summary.
Well, there's only one bloody death in that episode, so I think I know which one you're talking about.
That's right. Yeah, I don't think it'll win, but I would feel bad if we didn't mention Thorstein Drummond avenging the death of his brother Grettir by taking the short sword from Thorbjorn Hook and bearing it into his head until, as the saga says, it came to rest in his teeth. Now, that's a striking image and a pretty amazing scene, and it's a good way to end our list of candidates. So, what do you think there, John?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, I love a good giant disemboweling.
Yeah.
I really do. I honestly don't know if anything can beat the brawl on the whale carcass. I know.
But you know,
there's so many good candidates.
The thing about that one is it's the setting that really cinches it.
Yes. Well, it's also that, you've got, there is people being beaten to death with whale ribs. There's people being cut with flensing knives.
Yeah.
There's Thorfinn being killed with his own axe.
Right.
It's all of the stuff going on all at once.
Yeah. I really kind of, after we kind of went through all those, I kind of want the bear and Grettir to win just because of what an amazing scene that is. But when you compare it to what's going on in atop and around that whale, you can't beat it.
Yep. Yeah. I think the whale's got to do it.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's move on.
Body count. All right. So, exciting news here. Grettir's Saga actually sets us a new record for body count.
I don't think anyone's surprised by that.
No, not at all. What I'm pretty sure of, and I think this may be a surprise, is that Grettir single-handedly sets a new record for body count. I think Grettir alone kills more people than we have had killed in any other saga.
One of our followers, Matt Parker, was wondering. He actually sent us a Facebook post asking how many untimely deaths can we attribute to Grettir himself.
And I encourage Matt to count that up and let us know.
Poor Matt.
I'm estimating here, but okay. I'm pretty sure that nearly 100 of these guys are just Grettir's alone.
Wow, that is impressive.
The final number, by the way, for the entire saga, our count is 146.
146.
146 dead.
And that could be disputed to some degree based on some weirdness in terms of how numbers are played out in Saga. But
and I want to be clear, we're not counting any of the monsters, right? We're not counting Kar the Old or the Giant or the Glomsghost and that kind of
That's
thing.
right. By my count, there are about 5 unnatural things that are like monsters, spirits, things like that that Grettir kills over the course of the saga. So 5 unnatural things, and then 4 animals plus extra geese or goslings that were also killed. So Grettir, he's a busy little bee.
He does. He certainly does his part for body count.
Yes, he does. Now you're I want to adjust the number slightly in terms of humans. You said 146, right?
That's correct.
Can I add a 0.5 to that?
146.5?
0.5 is what I'm going to go for.
You better have a pretty good reason.
Well, my reason, and you could argue with the 0.5 if you want to, but Thorbjorn, you shared that lovely story about how he killed his stepmother in our last episode.
This is Thorbjorn Hook, yeah.
Thorbjorn Hook, right? Remember, she was pregnant at the time that he killed her. So we have a fetus that is also killed, a potential life. Right? So I'm saying that is a nice 0.5, which we've never had in Saga Thing history. So it's kind of
It's true.
a great opportunity to screw with the numbers.
Right. And I see the way that you're nicely straddling any kind of ethical questions about when life begins.
That's right. Well, I don't know how far along she was, so I can't really say.
Right.
So 0.5 seems fair.
Okay, fair enough. I'll accept that one.
All right, so we have 146.5 plus 5 unnatural beings plus 4 or more animals.
And I think, not a lot of controversy, but it is worth noting that this saga writer has an odd problem with counting bodies.
Yes, he does.
This happens 3 or 4 times over the course of the saga, where a battle will take place, and he'll be very clear about how many people are there at the start of the battle, and how many people are killed, and how many people leave. But that number of people leaving doesn't match the number of people who were there at the start of the battle.
Exactly.
Right? But he often will add people.
Every edition notes there's a problem with the numbers at some point in the saga.
Right. And so frequently we had to sort of go back and sort out how many bodies hit the floor, because you can't rely on how many people actually manage to get away.
You love that phrase.
Because frequently there's too many people getting away.
Every time you say bodies hit the floor, I just imagine you cruising along in your old Yaris, jamming to that song.
I've actually never heard that song. I know the song exists, but I've never heard it.
Okay, then.
There's a reason why the phrase predates that song. I'm reasonably confident.
All right.
They are referring to that very well-known and time-worn phrase.
All right. So 146.5 plus 5
Correct.
unnatural things and 4 or more animals.
That's
well
correct.
done, Grettir Saga. That is going to be hard to top.
It really is. And it topples Eyrbyggja Saga quite handily, which is our previous record holder. Nicknames.
Here we go. Nicknames. This is my favorite category. This is the category where John drones on about his favorite nicknames in the saga.
Really? No. That is not going to be the introduction.
Why not? I thought that was pretty clever.
All right. Notwithstanding your insincere enthusiasm, there are an overwhelming number of nicknamed men and women in this saga. I counted just over 100 distinct nicknames.
Wow.
And that means there's no time to go through more than a small representative group.
So at least like 75 of them.
Oh, no, we're only going to hit about a dozen or so.
Wow.
We'll have to pass over the pleasures of Orm the Wealthy, Thorkel Moon, Odd Pauper Poet, Helgi the Cheat, Gudmund Lump, Thorod Half Poem, Thorgrim Greyhead, Eric Snare, Bersi the Godless, Thorarin Folesbrow, Skeggy the Short-Handed, Audun Chicken, Thorbjord the Stout, Ogmund the Evil, Thorir Paunch, and, sadly, no Thorbjorn Salmon Catcher.
Oh, no. What about Asger Madcap?
No.
You're really letting me down.
I got 100 names and I can only cover a few.
Okay.
Nevertheless, I'm pleased with the final list, which comes in at a little over a dozen names. I'll go through some highlights here, and we'll put a full list of all the nicknames on the website.
Sure, we will. Now, given that you just listed out 12 names, I would say you're cheating and kind of pushing it to 24.
But I haven't explained them.
Oh.
And also, those aren't actual candidates.
Okay.
So here we go.
Well, let's see what you got.
All right. So first of all, Ofig Grettir. The name Grettir is of interest for obvious reasons, so I thought we'd start with that one. In Grettir's case, it's an actual name, but we're talking about Grettir's great-grandfather's first father-in-law, who's probably the originator for our Grettir's name. His nickname is usually translated as something like the Grimacer, or, as we said in our original discussion, Ofig Frowny Face.
That's right.
But another possibility is that the name derives from skaldic poetry, where Grettir means serpent, which might mean that Icelanders associated frowning with making a snake face.
Really?
That's interesting to me. Next. Kolbjorn the Scurrilous, or Snapis. The name Snapis is not auspicious, obviously, and I think it's potentially even worse than the translation Scurrilous suggests. The possible translations of the word include outrageous, dishonorable, ignominious, and disgraceful.
Interesting. I had that one as Kolbjorn, bringer of dishonor.
There you go.
Which I think is a great nickname.
Right. So far, Scurrilous is not far off. Bringer of Dishonor is a good nickname. But the verb snapir comes from a legal term for disgrace. Its modern usage in Icelandic is something like to chastise someone. But its original non-legal meaning is quite clearly to snip or to castrate.
Interesting. So hold on a second. Now, does that mean, because I took bringer of dishonor as in it's a negative against him, that he's the one that brings the dishonor. But what you're suggesting is that it's quite the opposite. He's the one that points out other people's dishonor. That's
what I think is possible in this nickname, right? Not that he points out their dishonor, but that he kind of dishonors other people, right? The Old Norse legal term in which to snip or castrate becomes to be dishonorable or to bring dishonor. It actually seems to mean something like the English idiom to cut someone's balls off.
Pardon your French.
So I'm delighted that this is a legal term. And it means something like Kolbjorn the testicle cutter, or more colloquially, Kolbjorn the ball buster is a possible translation.
I like that a little bit better.
So I like that one.
Can I just say really quickly that someone in my house is cooking popcorn and it smells wonderful?
Well, you should ask very politely for some.
Is it a problem if I walk away from you talking about nicknames for a moment to get some?
You weren't listening anyway, so that's fine. Meanwhile, I'm going to go on to Eric the Ale Eager, or Olfus.
I wonder what that means.
Yeah, we skipped over Eric, who's just a supporting figure during the Onan Treefoot part of the saga. I mean, his name says it all, really. G.H. Height suggested Eric the Beery, and other translations include Eric Ale Liker and Eric the Beer Drinker.
Well, hold on. In my translation, he was Eric Tippler.
Tippler, ooh, very nice.
Which I don't even know what I assume that means. He tips a glass.
One who likes to drink, one who tipples.
Yeah, that's funny.
So no matter which one you read, Eric's a bit of a drunk. And his only real role in the story is to throw a big bacchanal of a Yule party that ends with a drunken disagreement with a man named Holstein Horse.
Of course he would.
So he seems to have been a guy who liked to share the booze around.
Nice. Any idea why Holstein's named Holstein Horse?
You're not going to draw me into this. I'm not wasting one of my names on him.
All right, go ahead.
Olvir the Child Sparer. Now, this nickname isn't so interesting for its translation as for the story behind it. Olvir is mentioned in Landnámabók as a great Viking of Norway, and he gets his nickname because when raiding, quote, he wouldn't allow children to be tossed onto spear points, as was the custom among other Vikings of the time.
Wow.
So, I have to say, the bar for being considered a child advocate in this era is pretty low.
That's right. So Adrian Peterson would be in great shape.
Right. Well, too soon.
How could I? Sorry.
On to Kari the Singed. Kari is only mentioned once and very briefly, but I thought it was worth noting that this is our first explicit reference to what is probably the single most famous event in the sagas, the burning of Njal Thorgerson's farm in Njal Saga. Kari is the son-in-law of Njal, who's in the house when it's burned, and as his nickname suggests, not everyone in the house dies in the fire. Also, unless I misremember things, I don't believe this nickname is ever mentioned in Njal Saga. And so now we're getting an independent report here about how the burning affected the lives of people in Iceland.
I just really love the idea of someone who was in a house that was burning being nicknamed the Singed.
The Singed, yeah.
What a horrible thing to carry around.
And not only that, but, a house where his father-in-law, his three brothers-in-law, his mother-in-law, and his son died.
That's great. Well, good find. That was I like that one.
Thorgir Bottleback.
This is why I really, really like the nickname section, I must say.
Oh, you fraud.
The things that I learned.
Thorgir Bottleback. Now, this isn't so much a nominee for an especially interesting name as so much as for the way Thorgir gets the name.
Yeah.
Right. As we said, this comes about after a wine sack full of whey strapped to Thorgir's back is split open by an incompetent assassin. And to me, what makes this whole scenario is that, we said this during the summary, Thorgir's friends probably could have caught the assassin, but they were too busy laughing at Thorgir to do anything useful.
That's right, exactly.
They even come up with a verse about the attack later. In the old days, heroes would bathe shield-biters like shimmering fish in a sea of blood flowing from wounds deep as sharp-pointed roofs. Now, a weakling who never won renown far and wide has smeared, through his cowardice, both sides of his axe with curdled whey.
Nice.
And then, of course, Thorgir famously returns the axe to his assassin during the fight on the whale carcass.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Geirmund Wobbler. Vikatimber. This is one of those unfortunate names that ends up being even less clear once you look it up. So I'll just warn you in advance. I'm not sure about this one. The first part of Geirmund's name Hvika means shrinker, waverer, or quaker.
Okay.
So the second part, timber, means timber.
Yeah.
So Scudder's translation of wobbler kind of ignores the second part of the name entirely. Anthony Falk's
he's like a shaking tree, right?
What's that?
He's like a shaking tree. He's.
Is that what your translation says?
No, I don't remember what. I don't really,
well, Falk's translates the name as swaying timber, which has more of a place name association and kind of evokes Geirmund's Norway roots, where woodland is plentiful.
I see him on my list right there.
There you go.
Now that you mention it.
But the translation timber shaker or tree quaker is also supportable, and in my mind is by far the most badass of the options. Ultimately, since we don't know much about this guy, he's a great example of how important nicknames are, but also of how difficult they can be to parse out if you don't know anything about the person that they apply to.
Right, so this one could either be he's a coward because he shakes, or he shakes a spear at other people because he's a badass.
Right, exactly.
That's that's like
it's a wide range there.
Yeah.
What I think is one of the most interesting nicknames, just as a nickname, Thorir the Autumn Darkness. Halstmirkas. This is one of those names that everyone sort of more or less agrees on. Thorir in various translations is called Autumn Darkness, Autumn Mist, Autumn Murk, and various other permutations of the same name. No one offers an explanation as to what the name might mean. The element Halst, which is always translated as autumn, actually means harvest time. So that much makes sense.
He probably gets grumpy during harvest time. He's like, I don't want to go out there. So it's about his mood.
Well, that covers that part of it. But the association with darkness and the shorter days that lead to the cold and harshness of a northern winter, to me, seems suggestive. There's also a hint of paganism here, since a number of pagan festivals were unsurprisingly associated with harvest time and the closing of the summer months.
Okay.
We're on to one of your favorites, Thorstein Dromund.
Ah, yes.
Now, I'm really interested by this one. Thorstein's name is Dromundr, right? Which is usually translated as galleon, and is supposed to refer to his slow and deliberate movements, that he moves like a big-bellied ship.
Which they only really reference when they first introduce him. He's got a great voice, so on and so forth, but he has slow movements. But certainly once he becomes a member of the Varangian Guard, hard to say that he would be a slow mover if he's able to accomplish the deeds that he does. Even
in his journey down there, we do see a little bit of that in the methodical way that he hunts down Thorbjorn Hook.
True.
Right. But
yeah, I see. So maybe not. He's not like a tortoise or anything like that. He just takes his time in terms of making his move.
Right. Slow but unstoppable.
I like it a lot.
But I think you're gonna like this even better. Zwega offers the additional information that a dromundr is a barge ship specifically associated with shipping in the Mediterranean.
Oh, really?
Now, given that Thorstein's slow and methodical pursuit of Hook takes him right into the Mediterranean and Byzantium, I'm going to suggest that his nickname right from the beginning includes a kind of foreshadowing of his eventual destiny.
Yeah. Well, now I'm starting to wonder, does this guy exist at all? Is he just an invention of the author for that purpose? But
it suggests that nickname may actually be applied to him late in life.
Yeah,
right? Because very often we get these nicknames when someone's first introduced, but the nickname itself hasn't yet come about.
Sure.
Right? We'll be told that someone is named Tree Leg before they even lose their leg.
Right. Well, that's it. I wouldn't be shocked if he's an authorial invention.
Or that, yes.
In which case, good on the author, because that's a very clever creation with a good nickname.
Thorhall the Vinlander is our next one. This is another figure who's only mentioned briefly in the saga, but I thought he was worth pointing out.
Everyone you've mentioned has been only briefly mentioned in the
Thorstein Dromund?
For the most part, I say.
Now, Thorhall is actually one of the survivors of Eric the Red saga. He's part of Thorfinn Karlsefni's crew, and in that saga he's called Thorhall Gamlason. Mm-hmm. After Karlsefni's attempt to settle in Vinland failed, Thorhall returned to Iceland and settled there. His son Gamli actually marries Grettir's sister Ronvig, and they have a son named Grim Gamlason, who is one of Grettir's nephews. It's interesting that Thorhall is called Vinlander for the rest of his life, though. I think that's important, especially because a 15th century saga like Grettir picks this up. Right? This suggests that the memory of those voyages to the New World never really fell out of the oral memory of the island.
Sure. I have a couple observations. The first is, I enjoy how much you love the nicknames, and everyone else can tell because you start shouting during the nickname section. So if there's any problem with the sound quality and it's because he's shouting into his mic, and I have to make some weird adjustment after the fact.
What can I say? I'm a man of passions.
Yeah. The second observation is that is an incredible effort to follow the path of that nickname. I mean, it takes a real saga mind. I think Bob Hasenfratz used to call you had the saga brain. To follow that little...
Oh, I'm sorry. You're actually complimenting me for once.
Yes. I'm complimenting you. That is your saga brain at work, making a very, very astute and interesting observation and connection between a couple different sagas. You did that with the Njal saga, the singed fellow, as well. That does make the nickname section pop. I mean, that is good stuff.
Well, now allow me, now that you've made me blush, allow me to bore the pants off you with Ulf the Squinter.
Can I just ask, are you close to being done?
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more.
I wish you would die.
Ulf the Squinter, also called Squint Eye. His name in Old Norse is Skalga, which can either mean oblique or askance in addition to squinty. I'm wondering whether Ulf has some other characteristic. He's not likely to be wall-eyed, because the modern English term wall-eyed to describe someone with one or two eyes pointing away from one another actually comes from an Old Norse word, but it's a different word. It's a nickname, Vagleger, which with Vagel meaning beam, so beam-eyed. But various other eye conditions might be meant here. We shouldn't dismiss squinting in the sense of nearsighted, since we have to assume people in the saga age would suffer from nearsightedness just as we do. Right? It's a pretty common characteristic anyway. There are actually 2 men named the Squinter in this saga. There's also a guy named Thorhall Squinter who's mentioned just briefly.
So after all that, you've concluded that he squints.
Yes, he does.
Well, thank you.
But come on. Vaglegon is pretty interesting. Arnor the Hairy Nose. Arnor's name Hainuf literally means something like hay nose, which suggests that Arnor's nose hair is not just thick, but almost thatched, or at least sticking out in bristly tufts. Or, and this might be worse, it suggests that Arnor's nose is hairy on the outside. Like maybe he's got a tufted wart or something. Either way, not pleasant. Is
it at all possible that he has hay fever, and when it's harvest time or something like that, when the hay is something, he gets sneezy, his nose acts up.
You know, that's interesting. I think that's actually probably more likely for a different guy in the saga named Sleituhelgi, Sleet Helgi, who is usually regarded as having a runny nose.
I love it.
Geirmund Stiffbeard. There's actually several good beard nicknames in this saga. Thorir Redbeard, Ofig Thinbeard, Thorir Longchin are also in there.
You're sneaking in.
But I don't have anything to say about this apart from the fact that Stiffbeard is a great name.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can't see. Now this is the reason we have to go on with these things, because now we get to Ivar the Horsecock, or Ivar Betel. Zoega kind of unhelpfully translates this as Ivar Fescue Grass, which I've never seen accepted as a translation anywhere.
Me neither.
Cleesby Vigfusson gives us horsetail, which is a kind of rough wild grass. So Zoega may not be so far off, although I don't know what reasoning brings us to a different kind of grass.
Mm-hmm.
But most translators have pushed for a translation in which horsetail is understood as a dirty joke.
Right.
Asgeir Magnusson, Lois Bragg, Bernard Scudder, Jan de Vries have all translated the name as some variation of horse phallus, with Scudder going for broke with horsecock. Lois Bragg points out that the name might be a joke linked to his son Ofig Clubfoot and his grandson Onan Treeleg, and involve a kind of third leg illusion. As long as we're being highbrow with our names, let's get to Thord Nap, which means Thord the Stud or Thord the Knob. Now these are obviously very different levels of cool for a nickname, so it's a shame we can't know which one is meant here. The sense seems to be a hard sticking out thing, And yes, I realize in the wake of someone like Ivar the Horsetail that is an unfortunate description, but there is no clear sexual referent here. Right? We don't know what the nap refers to.
Okay.
And finally, Thorbjorn Hook.
Yes.
Thorbjorn Ongul. Thorbjorn's name derives from the same Germanic root word as the angle in Anglo-Saxon, and that's because both Angle and Saxon refer to edged weapons. The sax refers to a short sword, the type that Grettir prefers, actually, and angle refers to a sort of hooked weapon that was part sword, part axe, and part billhook. So the likeliest reason for the name is that Thorbjorn's preference for that weapon would be recognizable, and everyone would know that about him. The problem is that we're never told that he does use that sort of weapon, which opens up three other possibilities. One is that the hook refers to a bent or twisted personality, like Thorolf Twistfoot in Eyrbyggja Saga, and that's a real possibility. The second possibility is that hook is a reference to fishing. There's another nickname, Hongur, which also means hook, and it's usually understood as a reference to the hooked jaw of a salmon. So maybe Thorbjorn's a keen fisherman. But a third option that's been put forward is that it refers to something about Thorbjorn that's otherwise left unremarked, which is that he's missing a hand and has a hook hand. I'm not sure I buy that one, but it's interesting. Nope. If only because he ends up chopping off Grettir's hand as well. Also, we already know Thorbjorn's missing an eye, and this would kind of complete his image as a villainous pirate. And of course, just to finish off the nickname section, I'll just mention Saddlehead the horse.
Now, there is one more nickname that's mentioned in the saga that I think you should address. There's a gentleman named Thorkel Krafla.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what Krafla means?
No, I don't.
Scratcher.
Yeah, Scratcher, yeah. The Scrofulous, I prefer.
Thorkel the Scrofulous. No, what is the story behind Thorkel Scratcher?
No, we've already covered him.
Oh, so
we covered him several episodes ago.
And several times.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was just trying to extend the nickname section to 30 minutes if I could.
Screw you.
Now, what I love about the nickname section was that you did a wonderful job. And when I said I trusted you and was trying to avoid a Vatnsdala Saga situation, you really outdid yourself. I think you went above and beyond what we did with Vatnsdal. So congratulations. Now, that said, those of you who may have fallen asleep during that lengthy
how dare you?
Diatribe on nicknames, there was some really good scholarship in there. And I'm hoping that John at some point realizes that he needs to write a paper, or God knows he could write a book on the kind of nuances of Icelandic nicknames.
I do write about Icelandic nicknames. You just don't bother to read what I write.
You write about disabilities and nicknames.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but you could do a whole paper on the like I said, the nuances of Icelandic nicknames and the difficulty of determining what they mean. I think there's something really cool in there.
Well, but for right now, what we need to determine is which of these nicknames we like the best.
Well, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't remember half of the ones that you said.
Well, then out of the ones you remember.
What was the fella named Singed?
Kari the Singed.
Kari the Singed. I will say Kari the Singed just because of the context of that one. As much as I like the context of Thorhall the Winelander or the Vinlander, I don't think that's an interesting enough nickname. Kari the Singed or I would say Thorgeir Bottleback.
Those are your two options?
Those are my options.
We're leaving Ivar and his horsetail.
Oh, you know what? Ivar Betil. Yeah, I'm glad you referenced that. You know, I don't. That kind of thing doesn't stick in my mind like it does yours. So, so those three, I think, for me. What do you think?
Well, that's tough. I mean, the problem is I've always got a soft spot for these, these little ones that don't really mean a lot in the saga.
Sure.
A name like Olvir the Child Sparer fascinates me.
Mm-hmm.
Thor the Autumn Darkness is just fantastic. I don't know. I suppose we can give it to. We've got to give it to Ivar. Come on.
I think we do have to give it to Ivar. I mean, I really want to.
I'm sorry. I can pretend to be highbrow as long as you want, but
I know.
In the end, we're a pair of 12-year-old boys.
I didn't even translate his nickname. I just have him listed as Ivar Betil.
Well, there you go.
But I think that's because my translation was too shy to put anything in there.
Right. I think that's very likely, yes.
All right. So we'll wrap this up. We came in with nicknames under 30 minutes. So that's pretty impressive.
Notable witticisms. So this category is likely to be a problem.
No, we say that for every category.
No. This one represents a special difficulty. One of Grettir's defining characteristics is that he's like an aphorism machine.
Oh, that is true. He is.
There isn't an occasion that Grettir doesn't have a clever remark for.
That's exactly right. I sometimes get the impression when I'm reading that the author is deliberately using Grettir as some kind of repository for a collection of folk wisdom and witty sayings that he's collected over the years.
You think so?
Yeah, or either that or he's just decided the saga would be funnier that way.
Well, maybe a little from column A and a little from column B.
Mm-hmm. Now, so do we have to make our way through all of Grettir's best lines, or should we try to cover other pieces of the saga? I mean, we probably don't have time for both of these. What do we want to do?
Well, I mean, we can probably give a collective honorable mention to pretty much everything Grettir says and move on to the rest of the saga. I mean, there's Grettir's response when his father yells at him for killing the family's geese and threatens to give him a new job. The more you try, the more you learn. Then when Grettir's ripped the hide off his father's horse, his father mistakenly assumes the horse is hiding in the barn because of an impending storm.
Well, I mean, that's a reasonable assumption. I mean, who assumes their son has skinned a living animal, especially your favorite animal?
Well, nevertheless, he's wrong. And Grettir's only response is to say mildly, wisdom often falls short where it's most expected.
Yeah. Well, I think his interactions with Thorfinn Carson, the guy whose farm and family he protects against a dozen berserks, that one's worth mentioning. I mean, first, Grettir despoils the grave of Thorfinn's father, Kar, and when Thorfinn asks where Grettir's been, his response is to say, "Many little things come up at night." I don't know if that's going to work. Many little things come up at night, he says. And then he dumps the grave's goods he's robbed onto Thorfinn's dining table in front of everybody.
And then when Grettir rescues his family through pretending to side with the berserks who are going to kill them, and then killing those berserks, he doesn't bother cluing the family into what he's doing. Mm-hmm. So at first they curse him as a traitor, but once they realize what he's doing, they praise him. And Grettir just grumpily says, "I think I'm the same person you were heaping abuse on earlier this evening."
He has a little checklist, a little catalog of everything that's ever happened. Yeah. Well, he doesn't let up even when Thorfinn gratefully offers him unlimited hospitality and thanks for his help. "Thanks," Grettir says, "and I'd have accepted your offer earlier, too."
As we said, Grettir's wry responses seem to be almost a way of registering his mystification about how other people react to him. Mm-hmm. But my favorite moments of his are when he's just deflating everyone and everything around him. Remember when Thorbjorg the Stout comes home to find Grettir tied up in her house after her men captured him?
Ah, yes, that's right. She asks him, "And what drove you to come here and make trouble for my thingman, Grettir?"
And his response is, "Well, you can't plan for everything. I had to be somewhere."
He's right, you know. But we can do this all day. If people want to get a full accounting of Grettir's one-liners, well, they're probably big enough saga heads to have read the entire thing already anyway, so they already know. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you say that we move on to our actual nominations?
Be my guest.
Okay, so my first nominee is the poem that I mentioned earlier, Onund Treefoot's poem to Vigbjorn as Vigbjorn's dying.
You're stealing Onund?
Oh, yes, I am. Now...
All right, then. But I'll have my revenge.
Oh, will you? So, this is the verse that Onund speaks to mock the dying Vigbjorn after chopping his arm off in single combat. Now, if you remember, Vigbjorn had a laugh at the idea of one-legged Onund going into battle. And so, at this moment, Onund stands over Vigbjorn in victory and makes this spiteful verse. "See if your wounds bleed. Did you see me flinch? You did not deal a scratch to me, the one-legged dealer of riches. Many breakers of battle axes are more brag than brains. This man was not generous with his strength when challenged." I mean, there's so much to like there. And it's such a brutal thing to hear as you're dying, as this man towering over you.
Yeah, I like the bitterness of that verse.
Yeah.
And as I said during the summary, I think there's a lot of self-hatred in Onund's poetry. Mm-hmm. It's just part of what makes him an intriguing character for me. Right.
And if you don't mind, I got another quick one. And this is Grettir's mother's disgust with both her son and her husband. After Grettir's father Asmund storms into the house complaining about Grettir brutalizing his beloved horse Kengala, Asdis shuts him down by saying, "I don't know which I object to more, that you keep giving him these jobs, or that he does them all the same way."
That poor woman.
I know.
I gotta back things up for a second because you skipped one of my favorite lines in the entire saga.
Really? What'd I miss?
Grettir's great-uncle Thorgir survives an assassination attempt when an incompetent killer named Thorfinn tries to kill him. I think you know where I'm going now. Mm-hmm. Right? Thorfinn only manages to bury his axe in a leather canteen on Thorgir's back.
Yep, that's the one.
Yep. So, sometime later, Thorgir and his brothers attack Thorfinn's boss Flosi over the rights to that whale carcass. Right? Mm-hmm. We talked about this. This is our winner from Best Bloodshed. But in the middle of this glorious brawl, Thorgir climbs up onto the whale's tail and runs along its back until he gets to the head, where Thorfinn is flensing blubber from the whale. And as Thorfinn looks up, Thorgir unleashes a huge swing, shouting, "Here! I'm returning your axe!" and whacks Thorfinn's head clean off.
It's epic. It's everything about that whale fight. It's just great fun. But I do have one question. Mm-hmm. In all that chaos and all that fighting, why is Thorfinn still flensing blubber from the whale? Why doesn't he realize that there's a battle going on around him?
Maybe he's just incompetent at everything.
It seems to be.
Maybe the assassination was just part and parcel of how he does everything. So what have you got next?
Well, this is another quick one. I got to nominate Atli Osmundsson, who is easy to forget, and we kind of went through him very, very quickly. But he's one of Grettir's brothers. And I want to nominate him for his response to being run through with a spear by Thorbjorn Oxenmight.
Another person who went through him fairly quickly.
That's very clever. You're quite the Grettir yourself. Now, Thorbjorn tricks Atli into coming to the door on a rainy day, and when he does, Thorbjorn leaps out in front of him and plunges his spear through Atli's stomach. Atli has time to look down and comment, "These broad spears are quite the fashion these days," he says before falling dead.
That's a great line.
It's amazing. I mean, well, we said before that there's a great tradition of making a calm last observation before dying in the sagas, and this is a great one.
This is a good one. I like to think that he's trying for a casual tone here. Almost like he's admiring his neighbor's new pruning shears.
Pruning shears? What?
Sure. All right, I've got to rewind a bit again. You keep jumping ahead.
Okay, what did we skip this time?
It's just a throwaway line in the narration. Once in a while, you get a saga that offers a certain kind of dry humor in the narrative voice.
Oh, yeah. Grettir's saga definitely has that. Like with the cows, you said he didn't care for that very much.
Right. So I wanted to make sure that we represented that voice here. When Grettir's just starting off in the world, after already having killed his first man and received his first sentence of outlawry, he gets a sword from his mother, and he thanks her by saying that he likes the sword better than if it had been something valuable.
Which is unbelievable. Wait a minute, hang on. It's important to point out, too, that this sword that he's being all snotty about is the legendary sword Attartangi, the sword of the Vatnsdal chieftains.
That's right. And Grettir acts like he's just been handed a pocket knife.
Yeah.
It's because of that personality and his obvious tendency to kill people that the narrator's comment on Grettir's journey is to say that many people wished Grettir a safe journey, but few a safe return.
Which is a nice line.
It is.
But seriously, dissing Attartangi? Not cool, Grettir. Don't do that.
Well, he's going to end up with his short sword later, which I guess is more his style.
Yeah. Now, is that a phallic joke? Ooh.
No, it wasn't meant to be, but I guess it's as good a segue as any. Do you want to talk about Grettir's other short sword?
Yes, I do. I think about it all the time. Now, I'm sure everyone here remembers that one, so we're going to keep it short.
You're still making wee puns.
So are you. Oh, we're so pathetic. But the point is, so is the servant woman at Reykjavik.
Yes.
When she and the farmer's daughter find Grettir asleep and naked in a room of the house, the servant woman can't help notice Grettir's, how should I put this, his shortcomings. Mm-hmm. But it turns out that Grettir's awake and he hears her little jokes.
Yeah, and he's slightly annoyed.
Why wouldn't he?
But I suppose it's not surprising that he'd be a little short with her.
Oh, can we please stop?
Maybe. We'll see if anything more arises.
It's just terrible. Why do people listen to this podcast when you do things like that? Anyway, Grettir responds with a couple of verses in defense of his problem.
Mm-hmm.
Few invokers of spear storms have much choice about the sword that adorns their hair forest. I bet my bollocks are twice the size that other spear thrusters boast, even if their shafts can outstretch mine. I can't even read that. That's such a silly poem. Now, the second verse is even more crude.
Oh, dear.
The seamstress sitting at home, short-sworded, she calls me. Maybe the boastful handmaiden of ball trunks is telling the truth. But a young man like me can expect sprouts to grow in the groin forest. Get ready for action, splay-legged goddess.
You know, your version of Grettir's voice really just brings home to me how much he is Rorschach from The Watchmen. That set of verses really is just as much fun the second time around.
It is.
I've been reading this saga for years, and those verses still crack me up.
Splay-legged goddess is one of the best descriptions ever.
You know, incidentally, it's only in more recent translations that these verses even appear in the saga.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem with a lot of early editions of medieval literature, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. No, the 1914 Height edition just flat out refuses to include the poems.
Really?
His version just says, Grettir spoke a verse, and then goes right into, soon afterwards, Grettir went to the farmer Thorvald.
Wow, how Protestant of them. They just pretend the whole episode doesn't exist, as if there's like some kind of lacuna in the manuscript.
Oh, yeah, he just yada yada yadas the entire poem and sex sequence.
Oh.
Bowdlerized texts are so odd.
Admittedly, that is a little ridiculous, but that might actually be preferable to the treatment Morris and Magnuson gave it in 1900. You know, they tacitly acknowledge the sex, but Grettir's verses are replaced by a cheesy kind of PG version that replaces short-sworded with tired, and handmaiden of ball trunks, which is such a good line, with something like light-handed delight, which is not a good line.
I actually think in this context, light-handed delight might be even dirtier.
Oh, I don't know. Only if you're really sick. But, you know, we'll imitate our Victorian predecessors and we'll draw a demure curtain over the scene. Now, do we have any more candidates, or do we just want to award it to Grettir right now?
Well, I've got a couple more I don't think we should neglect.
Okay.
I'm a fan of Grettir's meeting with Gisli the Braggart. This is the guy who ends up on the receiving end of Iceland's first wedgie when he gets stripped to his underwear and then beaten black and blue by Grettir.
Yeah. And like, can I be fair? It wasn't really a wedgie. I mean, we overstated that quite a bit.
Yes. We enjoy ourselves.
It was fun at the time, though.
Right. Now, but Grettir makes a verse about their encounter, which ends with the half poem, From me that day at Mirror, interfering Gisli ran, farting like a cart horse, stripped of fame and honor. And as you pointed out, stripped of pants as well.
That's right. There's something awful about the specificity of that poem. I mean, why a cart horse?
Well, I'm assuming that cart horses didn't get as much grazing time as wild horses. I wonder if eating stored and dried grain and hay rather than fresh grass has anything to do with it.
Wasn't there an episode of Seinfeld where Kramer is he's a head what do they call those cabs? Those
hansom cabs.
Hansom cab driver, and he feeds the horse beans. Something very similar to that. Anyway, any horse lovers out there, please let us know if there's something about a cart horse's diet that would make it particularly unpleasant. Is he just feeding him beans, or what's going on here?
Hey, aside here, the horse lover brought to mind. Did you know that the name Philip comes from a Greek word for horse lover?
Here you go with names again. And a little something for any Philips in our audience?
Yeah. So I think we've each got time for one more quick one.
Sure,
it's killing me to leave some of the other good choices out. But I have to include Grettir's response to finding out that Thorbjorn Hook is now the owner of Drangi, the island refuge where Grettir's been living and eating all the sheep. When he learns this, Grettir says, "You've confirmed my resolution never to leave here by telling me you own the island. It's fitting we share the scurvy grass here, because neither of us is exactly smothered by popularity."
Which is pretty good. And it's only one of the one-liners that Grettir gets off at Thorbjorn's expense.
So what's your last one?
Well, I'm sure you can guess. I'm taking us near to the end of the saga, which is it's rapidly evolved into my favorite part of the saga. When Thorstein Drummond has hunted down and killed Thorbjorn Hook, and he's now languishing in a Constantinople dungeon, he passes the time singing to an old man he's been locked up with, and eventually the wealthy socialite Space decides to buy his freedom after hearing his beautiful singing voice. It's such a lovely voice. Thorstein, who doesn't seem to know when to leave things alone, insists that he's not leaving unless Space buys the old man's freedom as well. Space responds quite reasonably, saying, "I think you're a better bargain than he is." But then she gives in, buys both men's freedom, and the saga kind of veers off into the weird romance directions that we talked about last time for the remainder of its length.
Right. And the old man wanders off without so much as a thank you, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, well, he may not have been the nicest guy alive. He was in prison, after all. But there might have been a good reason why.
Fair enough. Okay, so those are our options. What do you think? Who wins?
I think there's no reason to debate this. It's Grettir and his penis poems.
We're ending up with an awfully dirty set of awards this time out. I just don't know how you avoid it with Grettir's Saga.
Right, it's such a, it's got a lot of dirty, fun stuff in it. And who are we to say no to that?
That's right.
We're very modern, liberal gentlemen. We're not shy about that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So Grettir, come on up here and accept your little award.
Thank you very much.
Outlawry.
So in this section, we are going to choose one of the villains of the saga and banish them forever from the island.
Mm-hmm. And boy, is there a rogues gallery?
Don't you say rogues gallery? Every saga you say rogues gallery, and in fact, in this saga there isn't a rogues gallery. There's hardly anyone worth considering.
I was not aware of that. Oh dear. No, I don't think that's true at all.
Insane. Okay, look, I have a list of 8 people. All right. And I'm going.
That's a pretty good list.
To dismiss out of hand Thorbjorn, Laxa, and Flosi because I don't even remember what's so bad about them. So they can't be that bad.
What? You should really read more
I know
carefully.
Flosi from what we just did. Flosi is the guy that gave trouble to the Onundersons and was part of the whale flensing battle. I don't really care. We got worse people than that.
That's fine. Yep.
Glaum.
Which one? Glaum the undead or Glaum the servant?
Okay. Well, okay. Now when you put it like that, I guess we'll eliminate Glaum because we're not going to outlaw an undead person, are we?
Right. Well, and also, we could talk about Glaum, when he was alive.
Right.
But
Glaum, when he was alive, didn't really do anything bad. He just didn't.
Right.
Oh, he wanted his breakfast.
That
Christmas
didn't go to
morning.
Church. Didn't want to fast.
Yeah. What a evil fellow.
That's not really an outlawing.
Yeah.
offense.
And unless we're in the world of Eyrbyggja Saga, we don't take our undead to trial.
Right.
So then.
But what about Glaum the servant? Now there's someone who betrays his master.
Yeah.
He is directly responsible for Grettir's enemies getting on to Dromedy.
Yeah, he's on my list. I don't know if he's if I would say he betrays his master in the sense that where you would want to outlaw him for example, for going and finding out and actually betraying his master. He just kind of clumsily and stupidly fails to do his job, which is a little bit different. Which I know that's kind of a Narvi-esque kind of thing to do. But not the kind of thing I want to send the guy off the island forever for. We got worse people.
Right. Now, I think ultimately Glaum lacks the kind of malevolence
he's just
of a Narvi. He's just terrible.
What about Thorbjorn Oxenmite?
Now there's somebody. I mean, here we have a guy who actually kills one of the Ismundersons. Yeah. He kills Grettir's older brother Atli,
and he goes around just trying to kind of cause trouble for Grettir while Grettir's in Norway. It's a huge problem for Grettir, what Thorbjorn Oxenmite's doing. Right.
Now, I think Thorbjorn is a distinct candidate. We have to leave him on the list.
He makes some. What does he make? He makes poems about Grettir's father dying when Grettir's father, in fact, is not dead. Makes fun of him. Right. He gets what's coming to him when Grettir kills him. So yeah, he's a good candidate.
I think one of the problems with him is that he's just not. He doesn't prove to be enough of a foe. That once Grettir goes after him, he goes down pretty easily.
Which is something I complained about in episode 3, that Thorbjorn Oxenmite is just there for a minute, and he's really the guy that should have been built up as Grettir's opponent, but he's dismissed very, very quickly.
And we've also got the Berserks, Ogmund the Evil and Thor Paunch, the brothers who lead that group of Berserks against the farm of Thorfinn Karlsson.
Those guys are extremely bad, but, John, I don't know if you remember this, but that's in Norway. They're not in Iceland.
It's true.
They and according to our outlawry rules, we don't outlaw people in Norway.
Right. They are not subject to Icelandic law, and therefore we cannot outlaw.
Which is kind of weird, but that's the rule we came up with.
There you go. What about Thorbjorn Hook?
Thorbjorn Hook is an excellent candidate. Although I'm conflicted about him because what does he really do? He's guilty of wanting Grettir to get off an island that Grettir has kind of squatted on.
I'm sorry. I'm going to remind you of the 0.5 in our body count.
Oh, wow.
Thorbjorn Hook responsible for murdering his own pregnant stepmother.
Well, that's a very good point. That's hard to forgive.
Also, recruits a witch to help him kill Grettir.
Did he recruit the witch, or did the witch kind of invite herself onto that situation? Which means
he's in charge.
We should probably consider Thurid the witch, right?
Oh, absolutely, we should. But right now we're talking about Thorbjorn. He is actually outlawed for what he did to Grettir, and in fact, remember that his crime is considered so heinous that because of him, the laissez-faire attitude of Icelandic law about paganism is finally revoked, and only at that point does the use of black magic, the use of pagan magic, become illegal
But what's interesting about that one is that it wasn't illegal at the time. They made it kind of retroactively illegal.
Right. But that's how heinous he was, right? That Iceland had allowed people who were pagan to quietly continue practicing their religion until Thorbjorn pushes it this far, at which point they have to outlaw the practice of pagan magic.
But again, you could argue who pushes it too far? Is it Thorbjorn or Thurid? Because she's the one that really pushes the whole time.
Well, but it's Thorbjorn who's held responsible for it.
That is true, but, how are you going to hold old Thurid responsible?
Besides, she gets her leg cracked open for it.
Yeah, she deserved that. Okay, so our real candidates so far are Thorbjorn Oxenmight, Thorbjorn Hook, and Thurid the Witch. Mm-hmm. What about one more candidate?
Yeah, I think there is one more very strong candidate.
One more potential outlaw, if I may.
One more, in fact, world famous outlaw.
I mean, what about Grettir?
Yeah, we have to talk about it.
One of our listeners, Matt Firth, he wrote to us trying to warn us against choosing Grettir as a thingman. He said, I hope you guys realize that Grettir is a violent and erratic criminal and a terrible choice for thingman, which sounds to me like he wants him to be outlawed.
Well, and I think there's a real case to be made. I mean, we said we have not yet seen a figure in any of the sagas we've read responsible for more killings than Grettir.
But one argument in Grettir's favor would be that almost all the killings that Grettir does are kind of justified.
Yep. On the other hand, Grettir is also outlawed multiple times in the saga. And spends at one point 19 years as an outlaw in Iceland.
And while an outlaw isn't exactly the nicest fellow around.
Correct. Has to move from place to place as he wears out his welcome in each region of the island. That's right,
but
really goes on a kind of tour of Iceland,
getting kicked out of each place.
Absolutely, meeting all the famous figures from all the sagas as he annoys them one by one into asking them to leave.
That said, he is a good monster killer. He's kind of necessary. He serves a function.
Well, right. It's that old Beowulf problem, right? You've got one of these guys around. They're really handy if you have a monster that needs killing. But then the problem is you have to deal with them.
But he's hardly Gisli. Gisli's an outlaw who is unfortunately an outlaw, kind of unjustly an outlaw. And while he's an outlaw, he maintains a kind of nobleman status. Whereas Grettir, throughout the saga, maintains the same kind of curmudgeonly, awful, terrible attitude that lands him in outlawry in the first place.
Right. Now, but of course, as I've said during the summary sections, I tend to read Grettir as being sort of a victim of an unlucky fate.
Sure.
That fortune, fate, and luck are all against him. And his sheer bloody-mindedness is what allows him to not only live, but to thrive for as long as he does.
Do you know what else is against him? His bad attitude and horrible character.
But, as we've said before, are those the result of his luck and fortune, or are they the cause of it? Right? I tend to read them as being the result of his poor fortune.
His poor fortune is getting into bad situations. The way he deals with them is his own fault.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, you can't argue with that, so you just say, oh.
Thanks. But I think we have to go back to someone like Thorbjorn Hook.
Yeah.
Now, Thorbjorn Oxenmight, I'm just not that impressed with.
Yeah, he's not terribly impressive.
In another saga, he might be worth outlawing, but in this saga, we have better choices.
The thing that appeals to me about Thorbjorn Oxenmight is that he is the troublemaking individual. Whereas Thorbjorn Hook kind of just uses witchcraft to weaken an opponent, Thorbjorn Oxenmite is actually going around talking to people, building a bad reputation for Grettir, killing his brother, doing all kinds of terrible things. But he's just not given enough screen time to really matter.
Fair enough. So, I suppose at this point it comes down to Thorbjorn Hook, or, to be ridiculous, Grettir.
I don't think it's ridiculous to think about outlawing Grettir. But Thorbjorn Hook is just a dastardly stepmother killing.
He really is.
Fetus aborting. I'm not going to say fetus aborting. Stepmother killing weasel. He's a weasel.
Yep. Yeah. No, he's the kind of guy that we love outlawing around here. Right? Just somebody with no redeeming features whatsoever.
So somehow Grettir's not getting outlawed.
Yep.
Which means we might be saving him for another purpose.
Because there's somebody else worse. I think Thorbjorn Hook's got to go.
All right. Well, Thorbjorn Hook, enjoy your trip to Constantinople.
Thingman.
All right. So this is the Thingman section. Each of us will now be able to choose someone from the saga to join our growing band of illustrious Thingmen. Unfortunately for me, Andy won the coin toss this time out, and so he's going to have the first choice.
Yes, I did win this one, and I was very happy to win this one. One of the things that John and I do is we flip the coin, and then we have to decide whether we're going to defer or not. And the decision to defer is a very important strategic maneuver that one can make. And in this case, given the fact that we're doing the 14-page Greenlander saga next time, I have elected to defer so that I get best choice of Greenlander saga. Which means John gets to choose first this time. Now, my rationale for that is I have a list of about 4 guys in this saga that are pretty great, and I would be happy with any one of them as my Thingman. So I might be giving up a better character in this particular saga, but it is with the hopes of getting a really weak character from Greenland Saga to compare to this one. Wait a minute.
That is genius.
What did I do
that is some
here?
Genius strategy right there.
Oh, maybe I didn't make a good decision here. But go ahead. You choose first.
All right. So I think I've got the same list of 4 guys that you do.
Okay.
At least I think our options for Thingmen are Onan Treeleg.
Yes.
And then his great-grandchildren, Grettir Asmundarson, Illugi Asmundarson, and Thorstein Dromund.
Yes.
Now, Onan Treeleg, of course, is a personal favorite. Right? I've written about him professionally. I really enjoy teaching about him. I really enjoy just kind of investigating him and his personality and thinking about him. He's a character that really kind of means a lot to me personally as a reader of the sagas. Grettir Asmundarson is Grettir Asmundarson. I mean, he's one of the greats. He's one of the fascinating figures of the sagas, one of the most complex personalities, I think, and one of the most human personalities you'll find all throughout saga literature. We said a number of times, that in some ways this saga writer is kind of just, he's standing at the mountaintop of saga writing. Everyone else has written their sagas, and now here he is kind of filtering all that through, and Grettir is kind of his mouthpiece for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Just so you know, Matt Firth, who had given us that comment about Grettir being a terrible choice for Thingman, he did say about you specifically, he wonders how you will balance your lust for both Onund and Grettir.
Well, that's going to be a real problem.
Yes.
I will briefly say that Thorstein Dromund is also an intriguing figure.
He is.
If Onund and Grettir are kind of examples of, what the family sagas can produce at their height, right? These very complicated figures, these very human emotions, dealing with a very realistic world. Thorstein Dromund kind of points us toward the next era in Icelandic literature.
Sure. Right?
This greater interaction with continental romances, this greater interaction with the literature of the rest of Europe. Interactions that have been going on for centuries, but they're going to come to dominate the literary discourse in Iceland more and more. Mm-hmm. And Thorstein is kind of, one of our early figures that points us in the direction of where that's going to go.
That's right. And just in case anyone's confused why we would consider Thorstein Dromund, and you're a really good saga reader and you paid attention and you realize that Thorstein Dromund actually never gets to Iceland. We only made a rule about characters getting outlawed who had to be in Iceland.
Right, because they're subject to Icelandic laws to be outlawed.
Correct.
Right, but
for
a thingman,
whatever reason, we've never made a rule about thingmen.
Yep.
Other than
that's
they can't be
absolutely true.
like kings and things like that.
And of course, as we know, there's a grand tradition of Norwegian companions as thingmen in the sagas, right? Everybody's got to have a Norwegian around to get killed in the battle. Mm-hmm. And of course, I will just say, I mean, even though I'm not going to choose him, Eyrbyggja Saga, we have to at least tip a hat to him for his defense of his brother, for his stern, warriorly mien in the face of his enemies, for even when at knife point saying that if he's allowed to live, he's going to make a point of hunting Thorbjorn Hook down with every breath that he has.
Right.
Good for you, Eyrbyggja.
Now, I know you chose Gisli's wife. Would you ever consider space?
No, and strictly because, I'm not going to choose Thorstein Dromund either. Right. They're part of a different world for me than the family sagas.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with that world, but it's a different literature, it's a different tradition, and it's just not a tradition that, for me, for choosing a thingman is going to be that compelling.
Gotcha.
So neither one of them.
She is a very interesting woman, and she's quite capable. I mean, she reminds me of Gisli's wife, one of your thingmen.
Yep.
In terms of her personal individual strength. And she kind of drives the narrative, which she takes over the narrative in a way that even Gisli's wife doesn't. So I was curious whether you were interested in her or not.
I just don't think I could choose a thingman who ends up being an anchorite. It is a bit of
a downer.
It's a real problem for me, thingman wise.
Yeah, you call her to court and she's like, "I'm busy. I can't even open the door. There's no door here." That's
not really going to add a lot to the parties at my mead hall. So for me, it comes down to Onund and Grettir.
Okay.
Ultimately, it's, for me, they're two sides of the same coin. They're these deeply kind of troubled men whose poetry betrays a kind of internal struggle.
Sure.
In Onund's case, it's the struggle that he never fully resolves of how to come to grips with his disabled body. In Grettir's case, it's, as we said, this sense that he's a man out of time, right? That he is living the life of a 9th century Icelander in the 11th century in a country that no longer has a place for a man like him. Mm-hmm. So do I want to look at the 9th century warrior who kind of looks ahead and finds a way toward the end of his life to become a lawful, law-abiding man of the community, as Onund does? Or do I want to look at a man like Grettir Asmundarson, who insists on being the kind of quintessential Icelander, the quintessential independent figure in a country that privileges the independent figure, but does so at the price of a kind of a place in society for himself?
So what you going to choose?
You know what? In the end, I have such a warm spot for Onund. I love him so much. I really hope he comes by to visit. But Grettir and I are going to have to spend some time together.
Really?
I am fascinated. Over the course of talking about this saga for so long, Grettir is a fascinating figure. He's a figure that I think, unlike most of the saga figures, you can read him over and over again and still feel like there are facets to his personality you don't fully understand. There are parts of the way he acts towards other people that some scholars will say seem arbitrary. Other scholars will say seem human. He's, as a literary kind of construction, he's a fascinating figure.
Interesting.
And I'm reasonably confident that no party with Grettir Asmundarson around is going to be dull.
Well, because most of the other people end up dead.
No.
Not the saga
not my
bears
crew,
that out.
Not with Snorri Gothi around. Remember that a lot of my thingmen, Snorri Gothi, Thorstein Kugason, Eyrbyggja, Skafti Law Speaker. Mm-hmm. Right? These are all my thingmen, and they're all working to support Grettir over the course of his life.
That's right.
So that many of my thingmen are actually quite friendly with Grettir already and will welcome him with open arms and a well-armored chest.
I hope they have got a well-armored chest. Well, that's fascinating. I'm not shocked that you took Grettir based on our, conversation.
I am a little bit, honestly.
Oh, I am. I am surprised just because of the Onund love that you've got. And I understand the Onund love. Well, I really appreciate that you chose Grettir. and I had hoped that you would, because I think he's an awful thingman.
Oh,
and
no.
I am hoping that most of
That's terrible.
I'm hoping that most of our listeners agree with me.
No.
Grettir is a troublesome personality. He's an interesting individual, but not the kind of guy you want in your group, simply because he doesn't take orders, he doesn't listen, he does what he wants.
True.
That's not good thingman material.
But he is a loyal friend to those who deserve his friendship. He never once betrays a friend, anywhere in this saga.
Becoming Grettir's friend is a very difficult task, and the second you ask him to do anything, he has proven time and again that he's more likely to ruin the party.
Well, as your thingman, Bjorn, champion of the Hittadar people, discovered, sometimes all you need is to allow Grettir to be nearby and to let your enemies break their teeth on him.
No, that's just because Bjorn is brilliant and he knows how to manipulate a fool like Grettir.
I feel quite confident that you've just complimented me rather severely by suggesting that I am also a brilliant master of thingmen.
That is not at all what I said. I said Bjorn was brilliant. I said
anyway. Why don't you stop stalling and tell us who you're taking?
Well, I had really, when I read this saga the first time, I really wanted to take Gudmund the powerful, or Gudmund the good. But he's only in 2 chapters, so I couldn't really get away with that based on our previous conversations about what's appropriate and what's not. All right, so the debate for me comes down to Onund and Thorstein Dromund. I love Thorstein Dromund. I think he's an amazing character. The fact that he goes down to Constantinople to avenge his brother is admirable. The fact that he becomes an elite member of the Varangian Guard is impressive, incredibly impressive. But Onund's tree foot or tree leg or wood leg or however you want to call him, if you read the saga and you pay attention to what he accomplishes and who he is and the depth of his character and the kind of man that he is, there's really no question. If I had gone first, I would have chosen Onund's tree foot anyways. So I'm glad that you chose Grettir. I wouldn't want him anywhere near my thingman. But Onund is the kind of guy I can work with. Onund is made of steel. He's the kind of guy that can go into battle not only through his wit and wisdom and win it, but also through his strength. Strength of character, strength of body. Onund is a true winner, and I'm proud to call him one of my thingmen. This worked out beautifully.
I think it worked out well for both of us. I'm reasonably pleased. I think you've got yourself a very good thingman.
I do.
And if you if you ever get tired of him, feel free to send him over for a visit.
Well, he's going to want to visit.
Sure, fair enough.
But that said, I understand the attractiveness of Grettir and the appeal of him, but I think you have to be in exactly the right moment, exactly the right time for him to work. And that's there's a little bit too many variables there.
You know what? I just allowed my thingman to speak. And throughout this saga, my thingman showed up over and over again as his friends and supporters. And it became obvious to me that he had a place among my men.
Well, I can always call Third the Witch to kind of solve any problems that we have.
Well then.
So, all right, let's move on to our final section.
Final rating.
All right, this is our opportunity to give our final thoughts on the saga. It has rapidly become actually my favorite part because I get to wax poetic about it. But before I stumble all over my words and my thoughts about this saga, I'll let John, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, for me, there's no question this is one of the classic sagas. I'm not sorry we spent as long on it as we did, although I'm also not sorry to be coming to the conclusion. It's a measure of how rich this one is that we spent almost 6 hours talking about it, not including the judgment nonsense. And my overwhelming sense is that there's too much we left out. I want to spend more time on Onund Treeleg. I want to solve the riddles of Thorstein's poems and Grettir's personality problems, frankly. I really want to do an entire episode about that weird subplot involving Stein, the KG priest who recognizes Grettir's description, Stein's randy son Kjartan, Steinvor the farmer widow, and her son Skeggi Grettisson. But ultimately, the inexhaustible richness of Grettir's saga is the point. It's a kind of capstone to an age of saga writing.
Yeah.
The author looks back over the 2 centuries of saga production that preceded him, celebrates the literary tradition of which he is a recipient and participant, and writes a kind of love letter to the sagas as a genre.
Oh, that's much better put than what I say.
Well, And as we said, he goes out of his way over and over again to connect Grettir's exploits with every other saga he can plausibly find a sideways link to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that makes this a great saga for finding Easter eggs in. But we have to say, it can also be bewildering to new readers. It points to what I think can be the biggest problem in the saga as well. Its need to hit every point, to ring every bell, and to climb every mountain means that it wanders quite a lot. There's something to the critical opinion. You enjoyed that?
There's nothing I like better than a bit of a nice reference to Sound of Music.
That's right.
In a Saga Thing episode.
That's right. I like the idea of Grettir singing on the hills.
Is he wearing lederhosen?
The hills are alive. With the sound of Grettir's victims. There is something to the critical opinion that Grettir's exploits often seem arbitrary and even repetitive. But while I don't deny that problem, I do think there's something artistic even in the meandering and occasionally inconsistent nature of the narrative.
Yeah.
When this saga is composed, the family saga age is reaching a zenith. Right? New kinds of narrative are dominating the literary scene, and Grettir's author shows a kind of nostalgia for the great Icelandic sagas. His attempt to encapsulate everything he admires in his predecessor stories creates a beautifully nuanced, but occasionally aimless narrative that complements Grettir himself. Just as Stefan Einarsson said of Grettir, this saga is bedeviled by fate and ultimately drifts.
Mm-hmm.
I love the nostalgic timbre of Grettir's personality in his story, and while I can't argue that it's a perfect saga, and I won't argue that, it belongs in a conversation with the greats. I'm going to give it a 9, but if I keep talking, I'll convince myself it should be slightly higher, so I'll stop there.
Very interesting. I run into the same problem that you did, and I think you'll hear a lot of echoes of what you just said and what I say. Only you said it a lot better, so if anyone wants to stop listening now, feel free, because it's just going to be a rambling
Don't you believe it, folks.
Nonsense coming. All right, so, I spent a lot of time over the last 4 episodes sharing my thoughts on this saga. And I think I went overboard sharing way more than I should have about the evolution of my understanding and in my appreciation for the saga during the epilogue episode. But that's where I kind of hit my peak in terms of understanding what's going on, or at least thinking I knew what was going on. So if you're wondering what I think and why I think what I think, just go back and listen to those again, if you dare. Now, in short, or in summation, I guess, I still think this saga lags in parts, as John said. Mm-hmm. I still think the saga author is a bit too obvious and overbearing in his effort to turn Grettir's saga into a who's who of saga literature. We've got more scenes built around cameos than the latest Sharknado movie. It's embarrassing at times. I mean, it's just exhausting. And I've never seen a Sharknado movie.
You're going to call me on Sound of Music, but you're going to do a Sharknado reference?
I did. I wrote Entourage, but I've never seen Entourage, so I don't really know. And I also have never seen Sharknado, but I'm positive that that's what's going on there. Anyway, like I said, it's exhausting at times because the author seems to sacrifice the opportunity to really develop his characters in the way that the Gisli Saga author does, to develop the tensions as well, so that he just instead wants to cram another reference to the big names of the era into the narrative, and that's not great. It's almost like whoever wrote the saga was a fanboy of saga literature, whose mode of composition was determined largely by trying to hit all his favorite episodes in all the sagas that he loves so much. I mean, if you've ever read a book by Ernest Cline, who's the author of Ready Player One, which I quite enjoyed, and then the really awful Armada, which I clearly didn't enjoy, then you'll know what I mean. The love of the era just overwhelms the narrative at times. But if you look closer, there's a whole lot more going on here. When you begin to consider what this author is doing with genre and with literature, and this honestly didn't occur to me until I started thinking more seriously about what the epilogue was doing and how it worked, the saga becomes a much more interesting and, dare I say, impressive work of literature. I haven't really processed completely all of what I'm thinking yet, but there's something really profound going on in this text. I'm almost positive of that. It's a reflection.
Almost.
Almost. That's why I don't want to oversell this too much. It's a reflection on the past and its relationship to the present. It's a reflection on the evolution of literature. It's a reflection on an evolving culture in the very midst of that evolutionary process. But it's not overt. Like much of Icelandic literature, its primary mode is understatement. And there's nothing here to give a definitive statement about the author's feelings, though I think at times we can guess at what he feels in a few of the areas. And if all of this is true, then this is a really impressive work of literature. It's an impressive work of art. It's the kind of text you can read and reread. Like you said, look for the Easter eggs in it. Now, I went into this thing, and by thing for this, and probably the only time, I mean a court of judgment. This Saga Thing, I entered it believing that Gisli's saga was the better saga. And I'm not sure that's true anymore. Gisli is the better saga hero. His saga has the more compelling and carefully wrought plot, but if I'm judging the saga on its literary merits, I have to be generous. There's more going on here than in Gisli's saga. This is high art. This is something remarkable. It's something for the ages on an entirely different level than any of the other sagas that we've read. That said, I'm giving it a 9.
Okay, that's... Wait.
A 9.
Wait. That's the same score you gave Gisli's saga.
Right.
You can't talk about how much better and more artistic Grettir's saga is and then give it the same score.
Why can't I? I mean, I don't want to go overboard here. I'm working with a theory of Grettir's saga as an impressive work of art, but it is just a theory. I mean, this isn't the Canterbury Tales or Beowulf, you know? It's a really good saga that's pretty boring sometimes and really amazing at other times. It stars a thoroughly unlikable character that you somehow chose as Thingman. You think I'm not going to dock it?
I don't find him unlikable.
Yeah, I'm going to dock it points just for that. I mean, Grettir's lucky I'm giving him a 9. I was going to give him much lower, but I convinced myself that this is a smarter saga than it might be.
Now you're just being ridiculous. I don't understand how you calculate these things.
Well, then I'll just be an enigma to you. All right. Now, before we put Grettir to bed, I wanted to share a few of the comments that we received about Grettir from our listeners over the past few weeks.
Okay. That's a great idea. I know there are some interesting discussions going on throughout this saga, but you're really more up to date on the social media stuff than I am. So what do people have to say?
Well, one of our regular responders, Adam Parsons, was really active throughout the Grettir saga journey, and we talked a lot about the sword, in fact. Recently, he wrote to say, thanks to our summary episodes, he came to the realization that Grettir has to be Tolkien's inspiration for Turin Turambar. You can't deny that both have horrible luck, he says, curses working against them, and they're both pretty rotten characters as well. So, you know, Matt Firth isn't the only one that thinks Grettir's kind of rotten.
Well.
Adam continues, both stories are carefully balanced so that you are left torn about which is the greater force and can never quite decide where you sit. And in his opinion, they are both ultimately flawed, enigmatic, intriguing, and utterly fantastic characters.
I think that's a pretty good analysis, actually. I mean, you've got, there's a lot of parallels there. I hadn't really thought about it.
Exactly. Yeah, and this was, according to Adam, our best saga so far. I think he really likes Grettir's saga, and our best string of episodes.
Well, that's very kind of him. I think I'll agree with him.
Well, I think so as well. I've had a lot of fun doing Grettir. Then we have Petter Nordenstrom, also enjoyed Grettir's saga. He said that Glaum's cursing of Grettir is probably the most haunting scene he's read in the sagas.
He's certainly not alone in feeling that way. It's one of the scenes that defines the saga and makes it famous.
And I should also note that Petter says Grettir is a truly frightening person and that he deserved the ending he got. So take that, John.
Ouch! That's a bit harsh, don't you think?
A little harsh. I mean, Grettir didn't deserve to die the way he did, but he definitely deserved to die and to be outlawed.
This is rough.
But to be fair, Petter actually wanted the ghosts of the dead geese to come back and get Grettir.
And that would have been an interesting end to Grettir's saga.
Wouldn't it be?
Out with a honk, not a whimper.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say that I've thoroughly enjoyed reading through the iTunes reviews that we've gotten recently. I know it's a pain to log on and write a review, especially if you're not a user of iTunes like John and I. We don't use it, but it goes a long way to helping this podcast get noticed.
It really does. Now we got a few in the last month or so that were really generous and really amazing. Thanks to Rectrup Landman, Mick. I'm going to say Mick O.
That's right. I think that's how you pronounce that.
And Anon 4837-828-38484.
Good job.
Kevin IC Designer and Tessadora for taking the time to review us.
Yes, I'm so glad you read all those correctly, and I'm sure they are as well. We are touched by all of your kind words.
Yes, I'm sure Anon 4837 etc. is very touched.
I know, and the same goes to all of you who keep in touch with us regularly on Facebook and Twitter. I don't need to tell you what we are on those; you'll just find it for yourselves. But I would say that interacting with all of you is one of the things that I personally enjoy most about this podcast. It's a very welcome break for me from talking only to someone like John about this stuff.
Oh, thanks very much.
Yeah. All right, now let's wrap this thing up. Let's finally put Grettir to bed.
Good night, sweet Grettir. Remember that you are my nation.
And may the cries of all the animals you killed sing you to sleep.
Poor guy.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye for now.
Wow, did we really get through all that? They can't see you give me the finger, but I know it's there.